I live in the UK, and sometimes I send postcards to my friends in the US. I pay £2.80 to Royal Mail. I know that's quite a lot. Royal Mail takes care of the initial transportation, bring my postcard to their mail center, and then putting it on a plane to the US. Once it arrives, USPS takes over and delivers it to my friend. Both Royal Mail and USPS put effort into transporting and delivering my postcard, but I only pay Royal Mail. Does Royal Mail pay USPS for their part in the delivery? And if so, how much? I've always been curious about questions like this, but never explored them in depth. Until now, in this video, let's delve into how international mail works. This year marks the 150th anniversary of the Universal Postal Union, or UPU, the organization that coordinates postal services among member nations worldwide. It got me thinking, how is the postage we pay shared between countries, and how does the UPU regulate this process? During my research, I came across a document from the UPU that finally answered my questions. Let's go back to the very beginning of the UPU and uncover how it all works. Before the UPU was established, sending international mail was a real hassle. Postage rates with units and mail routes were all over the place, varying from country to country. To make matters worse, each country had to strike separate deals with every other countries to set postage rates. These rates were often so confusing that most people couldn't make sense of them. To address this issue, delegates from 22 countries met at a conference in 1874 and signed the Treaty of Berne, marking the establishment of the UPU. Since then, bilateral agreements between countries have become unnecessary. A single agreement approved at the UPU Congress replaced them all. I think the UPU's early vision was a bit idealistic. They proposed the idea of treating the whole world as a single postal territory, and with standardized postage rates set by the UPU. Taking the UK as an example, it operates as a single postal territory, and if you are in London, you pay the same postage to send a letter to your neighbor as you would to someone in the Shetland Islands. This idea goes back to Sir Rowland Hill, who introduced the uniform penny post. In 1874, the UPU aimed to apply this principle to the entire world, inspired by the spirit of universal service obligation. This vision was practical at that time because most countries used currencies backed by precious metals like gold, which kept exchange rates fairly stable compared to today. Plus, the member countries had relatively similar economic conditions, making it easier to standardize the postage rates. Another key idea was that the country sending the mail keep all the postage revenue and didn't have to pay the destination country for delivery. This worked on the assumption that every letter would get a reply, balancing the flow of mail between countries. This concept is called the principle of reciprocity, or the non-sharing of charges. After World War I, economic instability and rising costs forced the UPU to allow countries more flexibility in setting postal charges, though within certain limits. As membership grew, it became impossible to maintain a single unified postal rate. In some cases, international postage rates ended up being lower than domestic ones, which didn't make much sense. This led to frequent challenges to the UPU's regulations. And the principle of reciprocity faced its own challenges. Some countries, like Persia, received far more mail than they sent, leaving them with significant costs and no compensation. At the 1906 Rome Congress, the Persian delegation proposed a compensation system, but it was rejected. Similar proposals were made by other countries in the 1920s, but they were also turned down. At that time, the Congress insisted this idea went against the spirit of the Union. It's no surprise that the principle of reciprocity was often questioned, but I was shocked to learn that the system lasted for nearly 100 years. The compensation scheme was finally approved at the 1969 Tokyo Congress and came into effect on 1st July 1971. It's known as the terminal dues system. The compensation rate was based on a proposal by the Columbia delegation, setting it at 0.5 gold francs per kilogram of excess mail. For instance, imagine the mail flow between country A and country B. If country A sends more mail to country B than it receives in return, country A must pay country B 0.5 gold francs per kilogram of excess mail. The introduction of the terminal dues system was a big step forward, but it's far from perfect. For one thing, the cost of delivery varies between countries. On the top of that, basing the system solely on weight creates unfairness. For example, 1 kilogram of mail could be 100 postcards or a single parcel, which costs more to deliver. Of course, it's 100 postcards. A single parcel is delivered to one address, but 100 postcards might need to be distributed across the entire country. Under a weight-based terminal dues system, a country that should technically be a creditor might end up as the debtor if the system were based on the number of items instead. In the 1980s, the UPU worked on a new system that took both weight and the number of items into account. At the 1989 Washington Congress, they approved a new approach with two separate rates, one for letter and card items, which are lighter per item, and other for other objects, which are heavier per item. This system only kicks in when the total weight of mail reaches a certain threshold, helping to protect the income of countries with lower mail flow. Additionally, a correction system is triggered if the composition of mail significantly deviates from the global average. Despite these improvements, the new system still had flaws. For one, terminal dues didn't always cover the full cost of delivery, and in some cases, the terminal dues rate was far lower than the domestic postage rate in the destination country, which better reflects the actual delivery costs. In the 1990s, member countries pushed for the UPU to introduce the country-specific payment system to tackle this issue. Before this system could be implemented, the Congress decided that the terminal dues would be based on the gross mail flow between countries, rather than just the difference in mail traffic. This change was essential to keep the system running smoothly. To better understand the defects of the traditional postal dues system, I created a simplified model to explain. The mail exchange between country A and country B consists entirely of 100-gram letters, with 100 tons of mail flow in each direction, equivalent to 1 million letters each way. In this scenario, the mail flow is balanced. Country A is a developed country where both postage rates and costs are high. The international tariff for country A is $2 per letter, with the cost of collection and shipping for outgoing letters at $1.4 and the cost of delivering incoming letters at 60 cents per letter. The domestic postage rate is 80 cents per letter, slightly higher than the delivery cost for letters due to the additional collection costs. Country B is a developing country where postage rates are much lower. The international tariff for country B is 50 cents per letter, with the cost of collection and shipping for outgoing letters at 35 cents, and the cost of delivering incoming letters at 15 cents per letter. The domestic postage rate is 20 cents per letter. Since the mail flow is balanced, under the traditional terminal dues system, no terminal dues are paid. Even if the payment were based on gross flow, the amounts would cancel each other out. In this case, in country A, the cost of handling 100 tons of letters is $2 million. Well, the postage collected is also $2 million. In country B, the cost of handling the same volume is $500,000, and the postage collected is also $500,000. Both countries break even, which seems like a happy story. However, there is a hidden issue. The international postage rate in country B is lower than the domestic postage rate in country A. Private companies may exploit this by collecting letters in country A and transporting them to country B at a low cost, and then using country B's postal system to send the letters back to the addresses in country A. This practice, known as ABA remailing, this is a type of arbitrage behavior that harms the official postal service. It is typically illegal but difficult to detect. And the following year, the UPU implemented a country-specific cost-based terminal dues system, assuming the mail flow remains unchanged. Country A pays country B $150,000 based on their costs, and also country B pays country A $600,000. If country A maintained its current international tariff, it would earn a profit of $450,000. Well, this might encourage country A to lower its postage rates, but we don't need to worry about them. However, for country B, the $450,000 deficit is problematic. The most straightforward solution would be increase the international tariff to 95 cents per letter, which would bring the system back to break-even point. The rate would also exceed country A's domestic rate, effectively deterring the remailing businesses. In practice, a country's international postage rates are influenced by the terminal dues of many other countries, so they're unlikely to change drastically because of one country alone. At the same time, it's unlikely that any country would suddenly raise their postage rates by 90% in one go. Such a drastic change could seriously disrupt the country's postal service, potentially reducing mail volumes. For developing countries, there were additional challenges, such as the difficulty of estimating delivery costs and reliance on frequent government subsidies for postal services, which meant that postage rates often didn't accurately reflect the actual costs of delivery. Because of this, policy changes in the real world are introduced gradually. In the early 2000s, a country-specific system was introduced for the mail exchanges between industrialized countries. Under this system, terminal dues were based on domestic postage rates. This worked well because industrialized countries had well-developed postal systems, and their postage rates generally reflected the actual costs of handling mail. Meanwhile, developing countries continued to use the traditional system. Despite these changes, the system still allowed some room for arbitrage. The ultimate goal was to create a country-specific cost-based system for all countries, but this was seen as a long-term goal. The UPU renamed the system for industrialized countries the target system. Well, the system for developing countries became known as the transitional system. Since the year 2000, traditional mail volumes have been steadily declining with the rise of the internet. In contrast, e-commerce has been growing rapidly, especially after the year 2010. This shift brought both opportunities and challenges for the traditional postal systems overseen by the UPU. On one hand, there was the opportunity to deliver e-commerce items. On the other hand, competition intensified from the private carriers and online retailers like Amazon. To adapt, the UPU has been continuously modernizing the terminal dues system to make the postal service more sustainable. However, the United States, one of the UPU's founding members and the country with one of the largest mail flows, believed these reforms wasn't happening quickly enough. In 2018, it announced its withdrawal from the Union. The main issue was that with the rise of e-commerce, the US was receiving large volumes of mail from developing countries that paid lower terminal dues, creating a significant finance deficit in international mail. The announcement came as a shock. not just because the US is a key member, but also because no country had ever left the Union since its founding. In response, at the 2019 Extraordinary Congress, the UPU introduced a major reform, allowing countries to self-declare terminal dues rate within certain limits. This change helped keep the US in the Union and marked a significant shift towards the more flexible, market-driven terminal dues system. The self-declared terminal dues system finally answered the question that had been puzzling me. I have been to the Isle of Man several times and sent quite a few postcards there. There are 4 postage tiers for all kinds of mail: Europe and World Zones 1, 2, and 3. World Zone 3 only includes the US, and the postage to the US was the most expensive. I never understood this, as I thought the cost of sending mail to the US was the same as sending to Canada or Mexico. Now I get it. It's because the US set a high terminal dues rate, which raised the cost of sending mail there. In fact, in the real mail pricing zones, the US has its own zone as well, but postage only gets higher when you're sending a parcel or tracked large letter. The document was issued in 2021 after the Abidjan Congress, and we can expect some updates from the 2025 Dubai conference. It's a 184-page long document, and I've only covered a small part of it. It's not something you can read in an hour, but if you are interested in this topic, it's definitely worth a look. I will leave the link of this document in the description. Initially, the UPU aimed to make the whole world a single postal territory, and it took almost 100 years for them to realize that wasn't quite possible, leading to the introduction of the terminal dues system. At first, it was a single rate system. Then it evolved into multiple rates for different types of mail, followed by a country-specific system, and most recently, allowing some countries to self-declare their terminal dues rates. This seems to be moving further away from their original vision. It got me thinking, if every country can self-declare its terminal dues rates, it almost feels like we're going back to the days of bilateral agreements. The increasingly complex system also reflects the difficulty faced by the traditional postal services, often find themselves at a disadvantage compared to private carriers. As stamp collectors, we love using official postal service, but sometimes we have to choose private carriers for faster and more reliable service. For example, back in 2022, when I was helping my girlfriend move from the Isle of Man to London, we needed to send some luggage, and I hoped the Isle of Man post office and Royal Mail would help, but I couldn't find enough information on their website, or it was too expensive. I can't quite remember. What I clearly remember was that I decided to visit a post office and ask the staff for help. And the lady there was very kind and suggested I use DHL, so I went with that. I believe stamp collectors have a complex feeling with the official postal services. I like Royal Mail. I enjoy studying the history and culture, and I'm always happy to see post boxes and post vans on streets, and I even have models of them. I usually respect the postal workers, but on the other hand, I have to deal with the rising postage and worsening service. And this is the case in the UK. And I'm not quite sure what's the situation like in other countries, but I believe the traditional postal system is facing great challenges. I hope the UPU does something to save this important system, which has been crucial for communication. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you so much. And I've got a little giveaway for you. This is an extreme philately photo I took at Westminster Cathedral, featuring this year's Christmas stamps issued by Royal Mail. I turned it into a postcard to send festive cheers to my friends. And since you stuck around this long, you are definitely my friend too, and I'd love to send one to you. This is a small channel, so there is no fancy draw. It's strictly first come, first served, and there are 10 postcards. If you want one, First, subscribe to my channel and like this video. Then leave a comment saying you'd like a card. And once I reply to confirm, you can send your address to richardphilatlist@gmail.com. This is my final video in 2024. I only managed to make 4 videos this year, and I really should have done more. Hopefully next year I will be more productive. As always, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and follow me on social media if you haven't done yet. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time. And wishing you a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Oh, I should show you the snowman. Bye.